Are you guys interested in the Samsung 980 Pro NVMe SSD? Stick with us. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Samsung 980 Pro NVMe PCI Express version 4.0 SSD. Now we're still going to be doing this on the Gigabyte TRX40 Designare motherboard. What's interesting about this drive? Okay, this is a PCI Express 4.0. It's Samsung, but more importantly, this is a second generation drive. What does that mean? That means it's going to be a faster drive than the first generation PCI Express 4.0 drives. Right now we have two NVMe drives in here, both PCI Express 4.0. The 2 terabyte boot drive right now is a Seagate, and the 4 terabyte drive that was going to be for instruments, well, that's a Sabrent drive. We started that as a boot drive. We went through all that. Well, now we're going with this 1 terabyte from Samsung because it's the fastest, which brings up an interesting point. The purpose of this drive is for virtual instruments as far as we're concerned, because our next video we're going to be doing is an audio interface. It's a USB. It's the first of 3 audio interfaces. First on USB, the next 2 will be Thunderbolt 3. So we've got to do this to get to that to go to that. So it's a stepping process. And for those that say, what is this? I didn't sign up for this. Well, remember, this machine is about content creation. So as we create content, what we want to decide is, where do we want that drive to be? The purpose of this drive is virtual instruments. The intent is faster instrument load time. Now, like I said, 2 drives on the machine, this makes number 3, which leaves position number 4 on the motherboard. Now, that 4th position we have to leave open. The reason we need to leave that open because we have a machine of about 5 years ago that has an M.2 SSD in it that we need to put in this motherboard so we can extract those instruments that we've had accumulated for the last 5 years and combine them with the new instruments that are going to be on this drive from the Pro Audio interface. So, which brings up another point. From experience working with the x399 motherboards, one of you guys pointed out that on one of the Gigabyte x399 motherboards, even though there were 3 slots or 3 connectors for an NVMe drive, the connector in the middle would not take an SSD M.2. It only took an NVMe M.2. So we're going to find out when we put this in where we're going to put maybe who's on 4th, who's on 3rd, that 4th drive in another video. Let's get this installed. We'll have 3 drives on the board, then we're going to run 2 different tests. I've been talking to the folks with HighPoint. We may be looking at one of the HighPoint controller cards with bifurcation built on. Now, what's on the plus side, it's PCI Express 4. It's got bifurcation on it, and it requires a 16-lane slot. And for those that thought they were going to put one of those in an X570, present company included, by the specs it would work, but I've looked at only one brand of board, but I looked at every one of them, and that was Gigabyte. And there's not a 1 gigabyte board once you get through the double talk on the X570 chipset that can take a 16-lane bifurcated card. They can take an 8-lane bifurcated card, but not a 16-lane. So right now, as far as we are aware, there is not one of those cards for PCI Express 4.0. They're all PCI Express 3. So it is what it is. So let's go ahead and get into this drive. And the reason I mention that, we're going to look at a couple of applications that we'll use to do a speed test on this, because I'm sure you'd like to see that. We will do a speed test. One of them is from CrystalDisk, and the other one is the IOMeter. I thought IOMeter was gone, but it's still around. Let's take a look. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to get this system laid down, and I got to suit up. I wouldn't exactly call this a deep dive, but it still has to be protected. We're dealing with ESD, electrostatic discharge, and these components are too expensive to monkey around with. So I'll get my gloves on and get my strap on, then I'll be ready for business. Now, machine is off. It's still plugged in, so I will turn the power off, I will unplug it, and I will drain it by pressing the power switch. Okay, with that done, I'll go ahead and unplug video, unplug the keyboard and mouse and the network. That's just in case I have to get radical. Totally disconnected. So nothing around, nothing connected. So what we're going to need to do to go in, we are going to need to pull the NVMe card out. We're going to need to pull the Thunderbolt card out, because that position down there, which is number 2, is where this drive is going to go. And position number 3, which is under this heatsink, is where the drive that's there right now is going to go, because we want this to be D drive and I want it to be right next to it. Now, is this a long-term solution? I promised you guys we'd take a look at the 980 Pro, but it boils down to how you're going to use this. What benefits from this the most? Applications, we've already got a pretty fast NVMe drive in there, PCI Express 4. The applications that will benefit from this the most, from our perspective, your mileage may vary, be different, is going to be running this with the virtual instruments. So, virtual instruments. I'd rather this be a 2 terabyte. 2 terabytes not available, so we're going to put in this 1 terabyte, and we'll see how our mileage goes, which means eventually we'll have to change this out to a 2 terabyte. I'm hoping this will last a year. We'll see. Overhead. Okay, card's got to come out, so we're going to need a bag, and we will need a Phillips screwdriver. And of course our special wrench that we talked about last time that we're going to have to get in here. And that of course is that 4.5 millimeter socket we never did need before until now. Well, we're going to need that on this again since we're going back in. Okay, we'll pull the card out. For the time being, we are going to probably leave this out until we get through with some of our monkeying around. We know it works. We got lots of work here to do. And we can, yeah, we're going to have to pull the Thunderbolt card out. So let's keep it simple. So we're going to need to pull the Thunderbolt card out, so we'll just keep it simple. It's easier to access. I won't have to take the Thunderbolt card completely out of the computer, but I will pull it up and get it out of my way. So it can still lay in here with everything connected to it. It won't be in the way. We'll just set it over there. So we're going to take that off. So I need a number 1 Phillips. And watch those screws because they are tiny. And for those wondering, I will leave the labels on the drives so that I know which one's which. So if you want to take those labels off, that's your business. That's your prerogative. And I need something with a little leverage. So I'm going into the back with a straight blade screwdriver. Let's see if we can pull that heatsink up. I just need a little gentle persuasion. There we go. Got it. Okay, heatsink is off. Screws out, heatsink is off. Now we've got that special screw to pull out. Sure helps having the right tools. I don't think we need to use the endoscope on this. You guys have seen that, so you'll know what that's all about if you've been keeping up with the other videos. I've got a screw on top of a screw I've got to take out. So we'll pull that top off, pull out that Sabrent 4 terabyte. And we'll get this heat sink on the side off, find a home for the Sabrent right next to where it used to be. And then of course we'll need to go into Windows and change our drive letter assignments and our drive labels. I won't show you all that, I'm just telling you about it. What I do want you to see though is the speed. I'm curious about that. Next heatsink is off. We'll set that aside. We'll take this stand off right here. We've got 1 screw to take out, and that screw will take a regular Phillips head. Oh, and I found out about another screwdriver from a couple of y'all. A Japanese screwdriver that's supposed to be better than a Phillips that'll work in a Phillips. I'll put up a link to that. I don't remember what they called it. I just got the email on that today, but I'll share that with you. So that top screw is out, and that knurled fitting looks like we could put a screw to that. Yeah, that knurled fitting, we could take a screwdriver to that, but we don't need to. So this drive is going to come out, turn around, and go in that location. So we'll go ahead and secure that. And yes, I'm using a magnetic screwdriver. So our 2 terabyte boot drive is under the video card. That's going to stay. Pull that screw out right now. All we've done is remove the middle NVMe drive so we can install the new NVMe drive. Okay, the primary boot drive, which is the Seagate, is under the video card. That stays. We've taken the Sabrent 4 terabyte and we've moved that to the 3rd position. And in the 2nd position, we're now ready to install the fastest drive in the machine, which will be the Samsung 980 Pro PCI Express 4.0 2nd generation. Wow. Western Digital has also just announced a drive that is a 2nd generation that looks like it's using the same Samsung controller. So it should be fast as well. Don't think it's available yet. I couldn't find it. I ordered one of these as soon as I could get my hands on it. The first drives that came available, of course, were the 500 gig, but I think we're kind of past that. If I want fast, I've got to have something with some capacity to it. Okay, packaging is opened. 980 Pro, not much to it, but it sure is beautiful. Goodness. Samsung 980 Pro, PCI Express 4.0, NVMe M.2, 2nd generation. I had to take a pause on that for just a second. That thing is beautiful. Now they claim that the 2 terabyte will probably be out in the next 2 or 3 months, so I hope that happens. I'd rather have one right now, but I'm happy to get what we got, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. By the way, this is BuildOrBuy. I'm your host, and my name's Gil Boyd. Thanks for joining us. And this is part of a series as we go through the build strategy of this machine. So I hope you're enjoying everything we're doing. So we'll take that out. That's not even in an anti-static anything. Wow. Samsung SSD. If I didn't know that was a special drive, I wouldn't know how special it is. I hope that makes sense. So now we're going to get that drive installed, and that's the Samsung 980 Pro M.2 NVMe SSD. PCI Express version 4, 2nd generation. That's a mouthful. Now remember, that drive is going to need to be initialized once we get it installed. And we've got that double screw we've got to put on there. Tricky, tricky. It's interesting. I was able to use the magnetic screwdriver on top of that to get that set. And I'll go in the final way with the 4.5mm wrench and secure that top screw, which is down now. We will replace the heat sink and then the screw that holds the heat sink on top of that. That's centered and that's secure. And the screw that secures that is now down and secure. So now we need to replace the elongated heat sink. We'll do that. Curious. And that heat sink, of course, the screw right there, will go right down there on that standoff. Now this other position is if we had a longer NVMe drive, because all these drives are 2280. If we had one that was, and I've never seen one that long, but if we were to use a standard drive, that insert has to come out again to get that drive in there. That's just an FYI. So down we go with the heat sink. We got to remember, there's a drive on this end now, and because this can use one of the longer, instead of a 2280, I believe that's a 22110, we've got a cover to pull off, so we'll peel that film off. And we're not peeling this one off because there's no drive under it yet. And the hook is on this back end. So we get that hook on, and down we go. Okay, lined up and lined up. Centered on that hole right there. And then the bracket right here in the back. So all you have to do is secure it. That part's done. You know, it's interesting. I've installed a lot of these drives in machines over the years, but I've never installed and removed and moved so many in one machine as I have this one. All for research. So that heat sink is now secure. So we have 3 drives in here, 1 slot open. That last slot, of course, we hope, is going to allow us to take, in fact, the other drive is going to come out of a machine about 5 years ago, which is an AMD 8350 CPU, and I believe the chipset was a 990FX chipset, and it's on a Gigabyte motherboard. So all those virtual instruments, and I had to stop collecting virtual instruments about a year ago because ran out of space. But once we get this new audio interface, we're going to have some more instruments. We need the space. So that drive is going to be exclusively for those virtual instruments. Now we need to get our Thunderbolt 3 card reinstalled. And that reminds me, one of our subscribers, one of you guys recently told me that the new BIOS, there's been another version that jumped the last one. Well, the BIOS we were using worked. The one after that did not work, but the one that's out now does work. So in an upcoming video, we'll give you some more information about that. But as far as I know right now, the latest BIOS is good to go, and that is as of right now, which is 10/9/2020. Card is back in the slot, and we'll get that card secure. I tell you, I've done this so many times, I think I could do it now in my sleep. It's amazing. I've never, anyway, this is fun. I hope you guys are enjoying it. I'm excited to see how this thing performs. So once we get up and running, we'll go to the BIOS check, make sure the BIOS sees it. Once we know the BIOS is good to see it, then we'll go to the operating system, go to Windows Disk Management, we will initialize the drive, then we'll format it. Then we're ready for the next video. Oh, excuse me. Then we're ready for the test. Thought I forgot, didn't you? Been there, done that? Not this time. Okay, we're good to go. We've got the video card in, primary boot drive, didn't touch either one of those. That's the Seagate 2 terabyte. We have the 1 terabyte, which is a 980 Pro, but I'm excited and stoked. And the 4 terabyte, which blows my mind, is now the third drive in the third position. Wow, how things change so quickly. We wanted capacity, which we got. Anyway, next step. So we need to go ahead and get our tools out of the way. And I don't have to put the card back in right now. What we want to do is get this up and running and test it. Unless we want to take a look at one of the drives on that card too. We might do that while we're at it. Now remember, these drives are set up as single drives. I had a question recently about the ASUS Quad card version 1. If this could be installed without doing RAID. Absolutely. These what I'll call quad cards, for the machines that they will work in, the requirement is a 16-lane slot. Anybody that puts one of these in has got to have a 16-lane slot. Not a 16-lane mechanically, but a 16-lane slot electrically. And that's been the key about the whole thing. When you put these in, by default, it is 4 separate drives. RAID is not a function of the card, it's a function of the BIOS, or it's a function of the operating system. Just keep that in mind. But I wanted to point that out because I had a question about that again the other day. And somebody had said, you've probably answered that question a billion times. I said, and I'll answer it a billion more. We're here to help. You know, we learn by doing, but experience is the best teacher. And after doing this so many times, it's just, you know, what good is knowledge if you don't share it? You got to start somewhere. It always helps with a separate pair of eyes, with somebody else's brain, especially if they've monkeyed with this stuff, that ask. That's what we're here for. Okay, we're going to do a quick inventory. 3 NVMe drives. We can do 4. The 4th one will be the other drive from the other machine when we get ready to do the instruments. I'll keep you posted on that. That's going to be an ordeal. Video cards installed, didn't have to take it out. Thunderbolt card was moved aside, back installed, and we have the Gigabyte Quad card installed with 4 NVMe drives on it. We'll get our tools put up, and then we're going to get into Windows, do that little dance, and see how well this thing performs. I have no idea. I'm seeing this fresh just like you guys are seeing it. What would be the fun in doing this ahead of time and then showing you guys what I've done? No. I want to do it in real time so you guys see, because, you know, sometimes I do silly things too. We all have our moments. You know, like, beam me up, Scotty. But that's how we learn. So let's go to the next step. Okay, we are ready. Everything is set aside. We'll get our packaging set away. And I don't throw any of these kind of packages away because I never know if I need to put the drive back in the box while I'm moving it from point A to point B. You just never know. So I hang on to that stuff. Okay, we'll do a quick inventory. We need to connect the network. In fact, let's go through the sequence. Keyboard and mouse. We'll go top to bottom. And I'll go right below the 2 USB DACs since we're going to be doing a USB audio interface. We'll plug in the network and HDMI as soon as I find it. Speaking of HDMI, have you guys seen some of the information going on about the 3080s? Really curious. There was a time maybe 2 or 3 years ago where the big deal was being able to hook up 6 monitors to a video card. Well, it looks like that's what Gigabyte is doing on their new 3080s when they're coming out. They've shown the interface where you can do 3 HDMI and 3 DisplayPort connectors, full-size display ports. So you can put 6 monitors. A couple of 3 years ago, that was a big deal. Now, not so much. Okay, keyboard, mouse, network, video, and power. Power is plugged in. We will turn on the power supply. We'll turn on the computer. And as soon as we get something on the screen, I'll show it to you because we got to go into the BIOS. Powering up. I like this view. I like to see the lights here. I like to see those. I'm not into LEDs, but I still find it fascinating. I'm just saying. Okay, well, this is booting and looking at that, and I'm waiting for this to come up as soon as I hear it post. It's interesting comparing the running of the fans as opposed to the fans that ran on the x399. The fans on the TRX40 are noisier than they were on the x399, but they don't, they throttle down. They don't stay like that all the time. Sometimes, now, one of them turned off, kick back on. But when the fans kick in, it's cooling things. And like someone pointed out, that's kind of like the parakeet in the coal mine. When those fans kick on, there's a reason for it. Pay attention to that sound. Pay attention to that noise. Okay, BIOS. All right, let's go take a look. Boot. And there's our Samsung right there. It says boot option number 7. It's actually in the 3rd slot. Boot option doesn't really matter. What matters is that we see the drive in the list. That means the hardware is recognized. I just wanted to double check. Now we'll go to Windows. So we will do F10, save the BIOS, and Windows, here we come. I hear the post. It beeped. I see the menu, Gigabyte. Okay, Windows is up. Let's go to Windows. In fact, while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and take this off so I have a little bit better manual dexterity. Take my strap off and take my gloves off because I'm through inside the box. If I need to go back in the box, I'll suit back up. Okay, Windows, here we come. Okay, we're going to go to Control Panel, which I have on the desktop, and we'll go to Administrative Tools. We'll go to Computer Management, and as soon as we click on Disk Management, another box will pop up that says Initialize the Disk. And there it is. Now, we'll initialize the disk. That sees that as Disk 2. It wants to set it as an MBR. We're going to go ahead and set it as a GPT because we're not going to be moving it. But because of the size it is, that's why it defaulted to MBR. In new computers, all new computers, I set all disks to GPT. The MBR GPT, different topic, different video. But GPT is what we're going for. So I made that change. I'm going for GPT. The drive is now set. And that 2 terabyte, I need to change the label on because that is not a Sabrent drive. Seagate boot drive. Done. Sorry the screen's jumping around. I'll zoom out for just a minute. Let's scroll down to the disk, which is disk number 2, unallocated. So we'll right click and do a simple new volume, and we'll set that as 1 drive. Welcome to the new Simple Volume Wizard. This wizard helps you create a simple volume on a disk. A simple volume can only be on a single disk. To continue, click Next. We're going to make the full size, so we're going to get about 950 megabytes. We lose about 50 megabytes. And assign the drive letter. We're going to give that, I want to give it, I've got to reassign drive letter, so I'll just go ahead and let it reformat for now. And this is now going to be called Samsung Virtual Instruments. So we'll do a quick format, and I'll have to go rearrange the drive letter assignments. Once it's finished, and there's the drive. it's up and ready to go. So I've got to redo the drive letters, and I need to get, I forgot about that. Since I've got the NVMe card in there, I'd have to relabel all those drives. So I should have done this with the card out. I didn't think about that. I forgot. So I'll do the drive letter assignments later. You guys will need to see that. All we know is the drive's there, it's installed. We need to run 2 tests on it, see what kind of speed performance we get. And I want to run it on all 3 drives on the motherboard, and I'll run it on the 4 drives on the card now. So that's a total of, my gosh almighty, that's 7 drives. Wow. Okay, here we go. So we've got our drives in, they're all set. Let's close all this down, and let's just bring up Explorer right quick. So as we're doing this, all I need to do is swap those 2 drives, C and D. All I need to do is swap those 2 drives, D and E. So that should be fairly easy to do. So I'll go back in and I'll remove the drive letter from this so I can put it, Control panel, administrative tools, computer management, disk management. All I need to do is remove drive letter D. Loading disk configuration information. You got this many drives, it takes a while. So the drive letter D would be right here, the 4 terabyte. Change the drive letter path. All I need to do is remove it. I think it'll be easier if the drives are identified correctly so we know what we're doing and where we're doing it. And the 1 terabyte instruments, which is the Samsung drive, I will change the path on that, and we're going to change that to the drive letter D. So there it is, and that gives us the opportunity to take the 4 terabyte drive, which is number 3 in line, and we'll put a drive letter on that and put it. Oh, drive letter E is gone. C, D, oh there's E. Those just jumped right up in line. Internal data drive. So C, D, E, F, G, H, I. So J is my next letter in line. Okay. These kind of issues are all things you want to think about how you want your drive letter assignments. What I'm doing now so we can have access to the disks, I will probably change again later because I'd like for all those drives to be consecutive. But now for the purpose of the test, I just want us to be able to identify which drive we're working with. So I have to give that a drive letter of J, so that's what we'll do. C, D, E, there we are. And that will become drive letter J. Okay, so close all that down. Let's look at it from Windows Explorer, Windows Flag E, this PC. So we have our Seagate boot drive, which is a 2 terabyte. We have our 1 terabyte instrument drive, which is the Samsung. That'll be the fastest drive of the machine. And then our 4 terabyte drive is down here for letter J, right there. So we're going to test these drives and see what we've got. Now, Windows Flag E, I've got these documents on the hard drive. And let's look at the testing applications, CrystalDisk. Now, CrystalDisk has 2 applications. One, CrystalDiskInfo and CrystalDiskMark. If you're wondering what's the difference, well, CrystalDiskInfo is just that. It'll give you information about the drive. I don't think we need that, but we've got it. The other is CrystalDiskMark, which will give us a performance mark. That's what we're going to use. So we will start with CrystalDiskMark. Let's install that. And we'll put a link up to all these applications so that way you guys can see it. And if you want to download it and try it on your machine, check your results. Okay, we got a EULA to answer. Accept. And this is going to go in the C drive. Now, because we're splitting some of this stuff up, we always have to be very aware of the applications of what we're installing and where we're installing it. Nothing will be by default anymore. All these instruments are going to be on that second drive, which is going to be a D drive. It'll be easy to think about and remember. But applications, I'm going to put them all right there on the C drive. So I'm just saying. Only one application I would not put on the C drive, and that would be your email. I would put that off on a spinning drive. So there's a link from the C drive to the spinning drive. So once you start doing stuff like that, those become interlinked and need to stay that way. So just remember that as you do these drive letter assignments. You have to think about the structure and what you're doing and how you're going to do it. Yes, this machine will have email on it, but it will be linked to the internal drive, whatever drive letter that is, once I get that all sorted out. Not there yet, but I'm going to have to think about it. Instruments right now are number 1. So let's get the install done for CrystalDiskMark 7. Let's run it. Okay. This is all about the Samsung 980 Pro, and the stats we've got I think are kind of amazing. If you can get your hands on one of those drives, I think it's worthwhile. The tough thing is trying to find one. We got our hands on one, but right now everybody's out of them. And another drive, if you can get your hands on it that's been announced, we had to choose what we could do first and when, was the WD Black SN850. We'll get links up to all this stuff, what we can find. The problem is right now, the WD Black SN850, there's only two places we found that had it. One, from Western Digital, and two, Newegg. So, either one of those drives, they both are PCI Express version 4. The Samsung 980 Pro has the second generation controller on it, and it appears that the Western Digital drive also has that same controller on it. So, either one of those you can find. We've got some tests we're going to show. In fact, what we did, we got kind of curious, and this is something we've owed you guys for quite some time. I want to thank you for your patience. And what we ended up doing was testing on PCI Express 4 with the Gigabyte TRX40 Designare, but we also tested on the x399 Designare for also PCI Express 3.0. So we're going to have drives on both platforms. How many drives? Well, what we started with and what we ended up with, we totaled 7 drives on one, 9 drives on the other. That's a total of 16 drives. What about you guys? That kind of blew my mind. So what I want to do is present these stats to you and try to make sense of this so it goes 1, 2, 3. And while I was reading through some of the comments about the Samsung drive, and there was a particular user, I believe, that commented on Newegg that said he wasn't getting any better performance with that drive in his machine. Well, the Samsung 980 Pro is for PCI Express 4.0. If you don't have PCI Express 4.0, then you're not going to see a performance improvement. And right now, NVMe is as fast as you can go, and the Samsung 980 Pro and possibly the WD Black SN850 are the two fastest drives, and that's as fast as you can get with PCI Express version 4.0. If you're still running PCI Express version 3.0, then you don't want those drives. Now, you can put those drives in your machine, and yes, they'll work because they're backwards compatible, and each drive takes 4 PCI Express lanes. But because you're PCI Express 3, you're only going to get PCI Express 3.0 speeds. So you have to understand the technology. So let's look at the speed test that we've got, and I think this is kind of fascinating. I'm going to show you what the fastest drive is, and we'll cut to that chase right now. Now, this is a simple test. We're using CrystalDisk, the CrystalDiskMark version 7. And this is the 64-bit version. What we've done is just a simple, straightforward test, and we'll concentrate on that number of the read and the writes. But the spec on that is supposed to be 7,000. So we're getting a pretty healthy 6713. So even though the spec says, as they advertise it, it's good for 7,000, that's 7,000 megabytes, we get 67 out of it. Again, your mileage may vary. So 6713 megabytes on the read and almost 5,000 megabytes on the write. Now the next drive is the boot drive. Pretty respectable results, 6713 megabytes. The specs, as they advertise that, qualify at 7,000. Now, we don't get 7,000, but we get 6713. You know, I can live with that. Can you imagine 4 of those drives on a quad card? Wow. But remember, you got to have PCI Express version 4.0 to get these kind of speeds. So the read, 6713 megabytes, and the write, just under 5,000 megabytes. So we're going to look at the C drive. Now, that C drive is PCI Express version 4, but that's a first-generation controller. That's the Seagate, 2 terabyte. So we get just under 5,000 read, 5,000 megabytes, and the write we get just almost 4,250 megabytes on the write. And again, that's the Samsung 980 Pro. So now we'll go to the number 3 drive on the motherboard, which is the Sabrent 4 terabyte. And the Sabrent 4 terabyte is just under 5,000 megabytes on the read and 3,472 on the write. So just under 3,500. Not bad considering the size. You know, I like it. I could live with it. I could do virtual instruments on that. May end up doing that anyway. I wish the Samsung 980 Pro was a 2 terabyte. It's not, but there's supposed to be one out in a couple of months. Now, the Western Digital Black SN850, they are showing a 2 terabyte drive, but nobody's got it, and they're talking like 4 to 6 weeks. So again, a couple of months. It's just a matter of time. Price, they look pretty good, but you have to determine, you know, what's best bang for the buck for you, and do you need the speed. For us, for virtual instruments, I promised you guys we'd test that drive, but after we tested it, I wanted to compare it and see how it looked with the other drives. So let's look at the other drives on this machine, and then we'll go look at the ones that are PCI Express 3. Right now, we're still all PCI Express 4. Now, these are the drives on the quad card. We're going to look at 4 2 terabyte Sabrent drives. So the first one, just under 5,000 megabytes on the read, and just under 4,300 megabytes on the write. First drive, second drive close, third drive pretty close, and the fourth drive pretty close. Now the next number we're going to look at are those 4 drives on that quad card, PCI Express 4, in a software array. Let's see that. And those 4 drives together are just under 8,500 megabytes on the read, and wow, look at the write. That's pretty cool. Yeah, you see it. Look at where the comma ought to be. 12,000, just a hair over 12,000 megabytes on the write. That's kind of wicked. Wow. You know, I wish the RAID was more reliable because in a hardware RAID it'll be just a little bit faster. No, we didn't test it. After all, 16 drives is a lot of drives to test. It took a little bit of time to do that, a little bit of time to put this information together. But what I'm just saying is I wish it was more reliable, because that would make a wonderful boot drive. But as you look at the numbers, we can get some pretty good respectable speeds when we go to PCI Express 3, but nothing like this. So again, I want to go back and we'll look at the, just as a comparison to keep it in our mind, what the speed is, and you might want to write this down or take some notes on the Samsung. It was just under 6,500, and we're looking at on these 4 drives in RAID at 8,500. Pretty good, not bad. So now what I want to do is I want to show you real quick the results on PCI Express 3. Let's take a look at that. In fact, I probably ought to preface this because on the x399 we actually had 1 drive on the motherboard. We'll show that. But we tried 2 cards, one the GlowTrends card that has bifurcation built into it, and the only requirement, it has to have 1 8-lane slot, but it does the bifurcation. It has a PLX chip. So there's 4 drives on that card. And we only tested in RAID, we didn't do individual software RAID. Then the second card we put in was the on the x399 PCI Express 3. That's got the ASUS Hyper Quad by 16 AIC, the add-in card. But it's the version 2 card. We will do some more stuff about the ASUS Quad card later, but that'll be a separate video because ASUS actually has 3 cards. 2 of them for PCI Express 3, version 1 and 2, and then their third card is for PCI Express 4. So we're going to do some testing and do some comparison, and we'll come back to some of that later. But we got some other stuff we want to move forward on. So we're going to show you the boot drive. We'll show you the first RAID volume, which will be on the GlowTrends Sky card, and then we'll show you the last one, which will be on the ASUS Hyper Quad by 16 version 2 card. So the boot drive in that machine with PCI Express 3, and again that's the Gigabyte x399 Designare, is just over 3,500 megabytes on the read and just a hair over 2,500 megabytes on the write. I'm sticking with the top number. You can go back and look at these, and I'll see if we can put something across the bottom to help identify these screens. Okay, the GlowTrends Sky card has 4 drives, and I believe those were Samsung drives, and those were 500 gig drives. So those 4 500 gig drives gives us 2 terabytes on a partition. If somebody wants to go with speed, those were the drives we originally tested when we looked at the original ASUS Hyper Quad by 16 card version 1. So we pulled those drives out, put them on that card to do the testing with. A lot of stuff moving around. It's been difficult to keep in my head. I hope I'm explaining it in a simple enough way that you guys can understand, because after I did the test, it was like, wow. The more I learned, the more I wanted to know, and the more I knew, the more I needed to know. So anyway, the numbers we've got, I think, speak for themselves. Those are Samsung. I believe they're the 970 EVOs. So the read for those 4 drives in a software RAID is just over 6,100 megabytes, and the write for those 4 drives is just over 7,000 megabytes. Now, for anybody that needs to put in or wants to put in one of these cards and you don't have the resources for it, I mean, there's the numbers on an 8-lane slot. For those with an X470 or the X570 chipset and you don't have the resources because you don't have a 16-lane slot with a video card in there, you've got that 8-lane slot, and you can put in that card. Now, we may be looking at a high point card later that does some amazing things. When we talk about that, we'll show some stats and present that information to you. But to reiterate, if you need a card and you want the speed and you've only got one 8-lane slot, these are some pretty good numbers, pretty good results. Pretty good bang for the buck, I think, for what you get. Now, this next one we're going to show is 4 drives on the ASUS Hyper Quad by 16 card version 2. Again, PCI Express version 3. And the numbers on that card, if you'll notice, that's a full 2 terabytes. And those again are also the Samsung 970 EVOs, PCI Express version 3. So to get that kind of speed, you've got to have, remember the qualifications for each card. That card requires one 16-lane slot, but your motherboard has to be able to bifurcate that slot. So that card's made for a high-end desktop. That's not a card you're going to use on an X570. If you have an X570, according to the specs, the chipset is supposed to be able to do it, but I looked at every Gigabyte board, and I expect all the other brands to be the same because one of you guys were asking. And you guys asking questions helps us to make better videos because it's all about you guys. I love you guys. I think you're amazing and appreciate everybody watching. if you don't have a 16-lane slot, and by the way, that 16-lane slot on the X570, the only way you have a 16-lane slot to use for a card like this is you got to use video on the motherboard, which that means it comes out of your CPU. So instead of having a GPU, you're using the APU that's in the CPU. Okay, let me reiterate and explain this a different way. Why is this important? When you put something on that slot and then you use the second slot, that first 16-lane slot on the X570, as soon as you put something on the second slot, they both drop down to by 8. Now they may look like by 16 mechanically, but you'll end up with 2 by 8 slots. By 16 mechanically, by 8 electrically. And to run one of these cards to get these kind of stats, you got to have about a 16-lane slot. If you're using an external video card, it drops down. Video card's running by 8, that card's running by 8. Now, if you take like an ASUS Hyper Quad card or even the Gigabyte Quad card and you put that on your motherboard, what's going to happen? You won't see 4 drives, you're going to see 2 drives. Why? Because you've only got an 8-lane slot. Even if you bifurcate it, you're only going to see 2 drives. So if you want to put 4 drives in your machine, you're going to have a card that will do the bifurcation. The Glowtrends Sky card can do that. HighPoint has a card also that can do that with PLX chips on it. And it takes an 8-lane slot and does the rest. Now the HighPoint card we may be looking at is kind of an oxymoron because it may have bifurcation built in, but it's going to require a 16-lane slot. So on PCI Express 4, that's kind of like, huh? Because again, if you're going to have a 16-lane slot, you're going to be able to bifurcate it, and by the way, it's going to be a high-end desktop, and by the way, it's going to be on a TRX40 chipset. I'm just saying. But I wanted to share this with you, and I'm going to go back one last screen, and we'll look at the numbers. I thought about putting this on a spreadsheet, but I was like, I want to show you this the way you would see it, and you can go through in the screen and check these numbers out, because I think it's pretty amazing. But again, it's all about, what kind of performance you need and what you're doing with it. You can do a hardware RAID or you can do a software RAID. Hardware RAID can blow up. I've had it happen before, and that's a real bummer when it does. And remember, if you decide to do RAID, whether it's hardware RAID, which is a hybrid RAID with the BIOS, or a software RAID, which is the operating system, what's the difference? Hardware RAID is bootable, software RAID is not. The hardware RAID is more fragile. It can blow up. I've not had a software RAID blow up on me, so that's just something to consider. But because the hardware RAID is bootable, but if you're in a situation like us and you're creating a machine for content creation, it makes sense to have an aggregation of these drives. Aggregation means to bring them together, to combine them. So if you choose to do something like that, the thing that makes the most sense to take advantage of the speed, in my opinion, is virtual instruments. And as we progress through this, we're going to be loading some virtual instruments, and we'll see how quickly they load. I don't know, we'll do a comparison of this drive versus that, because it takes, for anybody that's installed virtual instruments, if you're installing new, that's one thing. Copy them over, that's another. But either way you go, it's a can of worms. It takes time. So once you get them installed, then you get them configured where you can use them. It's just, I'm going to put them on the drive, and I'll show you the kind of results we get on the Samsung 980 Pro, and then you can decide for yourself. I don't see that as a boot drive, but I like that as an instrument drive. I would love to have had 4 of those drives to have tested, but we got what we could get, and we did what we could do. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. This is a wrap on this video. We're out, on to the next video, and I got to show that one last time. That is the Samsung 980 Pro, which is PCI Express 4.0, and it's a 2nd generation controller. It's advertised as 7,000 megabytes on the read, and we're getting 67, just over 6,700. That's pretty good. Hope you enjoyed this. We'll see you all in the next video.